around with the charcoal shirt?
That's because I'm about to get roasted. Charcoal? Roasted.
William, did it need, Councillor Owen-Jones, did it need one of us who are actually here to nominate somebody, or is that the process?
Yeah, I reckon. And Councillor McDonald, I thought that it would make sense if it was maybe you, because you are the person that has been in council the longest, and you might enjoy the idea of chairing a virtual meeting.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. I'm happy to second that. Committee members.
So I can't move it, Councillor Young. So
well, I'm happy to move.
People in the room.
Yeah, I'm happy to move it.
And I'm happy to second it.
That. Oh, anyone? Darren, you're not on the committee, are you?
Yep.
Are you? You are.
Before we start, I just got a quick glimpse of Lee's shirt combination. Is that pink or purple, Lee?
I'd say pink. Yeah.
Very ordinary anyway.
And when you go into retirement, Lee, will you be having multiple polo shirts of different colours? So much more fun when you can't answer back. Right. Daff, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Excellent. I'll leave you to steer the good ship.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Owen-Jones. Attendance and apologies. Welcome, Councillor Owen-Jones, through the remote dial-in. I don't think we've heard from Councillor Patterson or Councillor Hemmel. So what do we do?
Well, not apologies at the moment, so they may turn up late, or we've just tried to ring Councillor Patterson. I'm not sure what the response has been.
Okay.
No response.
Okay.
So does there need to be a resolution to permit Councillor Owen-Jones, or no, we don't have to do that?
Councillor Hemmel's just...
If it was on another basis beyond work health and safety, there would need to be a resolution. But
Morning.
on the basis of work health and safety, the chair's got the discretion to allow the remote dialing.
Okay, but there's no formal resolution required.
Not required for that.
Wonderful.
Okay, well, we'll commence the meeting at 9:07, and this is the 817th committee meeting, and we have no leave of absence. Confirmation of the minutes of the...
Excuse me, Chair. I just got a text message from Councillor Patterson asking for her apology to be passed on.
Oh, okay. All right. Could I have someone move the apology for Councillor Patterson, please? Moved by Councillor PC Young, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favour? Against? Carried. Any conflict of interest declarations? Councillor Forster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, item 6.1 deals with the Tourist Parks March 2022 budget review. I'd like to draw the meeting's attention to the fact that I have previously made a declaration pertaining to the interests of Tony and Nikki Wilson. They own a development site along the Gold Coast Highway, which currently functions as a tourist park. To my mind, no genuine conflict of interest arises, declarable or prescribed. But I thought I'd draw that to the attention of the meeting in case councillors formed the view that council's participation in this industry would cause Tony or Nikki Wilson and their business interests to suffer a loss or make a gain. And I'm in your hands.
Councillors? Councillor Young?
Thanks, Councillor McDonald, and through the chair. I wouldn't say that you had a conflict of interest. It's a privately owned park, and there's other privately owned parks within the city that operate, that's not actually against, but operate as private commercial businesses, and as the city has other businesses in other industries as well that have commercial people running against them. I don't believe it's a conflict, but I appreciate the fact that you brought it to our notice.
The advice from the city solicitor is that 6.1 is an ordinary business matter, because it's budget related.
All right.
So there'd be no conflicts required.
Thanks.
great.
Thanks,
No,
CEO.
no conflicts.
Thank you, and thank you for bearing with me, colleagues.
Any further conflicts, declarations? No further ones. Number 5, the committee forward planning schedule. Actually, we've got a number of starred items. Did anyone want to unstar any of the starred items for comment? Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to unstar 6.3 and 6.4, please, just for a question.
6.3 and 6.4. Any other starred items be unstarred? Could I have someone move the starred items? Moved by Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favour? Against? Carried. So 5.1, 6.1, 6.2, 6.5, 6.6, all the starred items except 6.3 and 6.4. So 6.3, we'll go to 6.3.
We've got to take the vote, Daff.
Sorry.
We've got to take the vote on the starred items.
Oh, sorry. I'm out of practice. Everyone move the starred items, please. All in favour? Against? Carried. I had a mover and seconder for that, didn't I?
You did.
Okay. Now 6.3.
Thank you. I don't know that anyone needed a presentation, but I just had a question, if I may. And the question actually relates to 6.3 and 6.4. It's just the one question. And it was simply about, on page 47, the strategic land purchase that is being deferred. It's mentioned on page 47 of 6.3, and then on page 64 of 6.4, there's also a deferral of land, and I wondered if it was the same parcel of land, they're different figures, and where the land was and why the deferral, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, they're related, those two items, and we are seeking to purchase a number of parcels of land. We have been in negotiations around them. Unfortunately, at least one of them that we thought would potentially come to fruition this year looks like it's slipped through our grasp. That's why that particular item is deferred. We are, however, continuing to pursue other options and opportunities for both the waste and the water business.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Madam Chair, could I just clarify? Sorry, Director said it's deferred, as in there's a chance in the future it slipped through our hands as it's not going to happen?
Look, for the one particular parcel that we had advanced most, it looks like it's not going to happen, but we are pursuing other parcels as well.
I'm getting the feeling you obviously don't want to tell us in open what this is, so can we receive something in confidential in a memo outlining what properties we're talking about?
Certainly, we can do that.
Cool.
Any further comments?
That's it. I'm happy to move 6.3. I guess we have to do them separately, but I'll move 6.3.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Gates, 6.3. Could I have a seconder, please? Second by Councillor Young. Any further discussion on 6.3? All in favour? Against? Carried. 6.4, Councillor Gates.
Well, I'm happy to move it. It was the same question and the directors answered it in the first go, so that's fine. So moved.
Moved by Councillor Gates. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Young, seconded. Any further discussion on 6.4? No further discussion. Could I have the vote, please? All in favour? Against? Carried. 6.5. Starred. 6.6 on page 89. Would you like a presentation on this or just ask questions? What would you like to do? Councillors?
Question. I don't know what anyone else wants.
Would I presentation?
No, we hadn't intended to present.
That's fine.
If there's just questions.
All right. Councillor Gates.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On page 91, it talks about the infrastructure renewal requirement. I just wanted to ask you if the funds that are necessary and referenced are in the draft budget, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, they are.
They
Councillor
are.
Gates.
Okay, that's it. Move.
Any further discussions?
Councillor McDonald, you mightn't see me down here.
Sorry.
If I could just ask a question in regards to page 96, where we note that the chapel exterior refurbishment for the Hotter grounds, and I know that that was deferred in a previous year. We actually deferred that because we reallocated the funding for something else. Do we have we spent the money on something else? And secondly, does that refurbishment really need to happen?
Again, through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Owen Jones, I can't confirm whether the money was expensed elsewhere, but the works in respect to the refurbishment are now underway. That project contract's been let. Predominantly exterior fabric of the building is being refreshed and renewed due to just deterioration, basically. So those works are currently underway.
Maybe through you, Chair, to Councillor Vorster, maybe you could ask this afternoon as to whether or not that it was Capital Works for the illuminating of part of the Hotter precinct with images. Can you recall that? Maybe you could ask them if they've commenced.
Sorry, Councillor Owen Jones, where do you propose I ask that?
So this afternoon, it may not be your committee.
No. Okay, but I'm happy to put in a formal request for information with our Chief Executive Officer in the meantime.
Yeah, you could do that. Or who's on this afternoon's committee? Maybe somebody could ask them how they're going with their illumination project, and then you don't need to worry about an acceptable request, Councillor Vorster.
That sounds like an acceptable solution. Thank you.
Here.
Is that all, Councillor Owen Jones?
For the time being, yeah, I reckon it is.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Hamill.
Madam Acting Chair, on page 99, it includes details of new upgrade proposals for 2022-2023 include, and the first bullet point is about Hotter Future Stages 22-23. I can understand why the bullet points underneath are in the report because they're projects that have been committed to, but what is the first bullet point in reference to?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Hamill will have to come back and provide a response to you that. I can't, off the top of my head, clarify exactly what those funds are.
Yep. If you could, please.
That's fine.
Yep.
Yeah, it's future stages.
My understanding is that's the planning for the future stages of Hotter, but yeah, Elton's.
So I'd understand that, Joe, but why would that be in the asset management report of something that hasn't been committed to yet? The other projects are things that are going to be done, and I can understand why this now going to be planning for future asset.
Yeah, well, this will be in the total asset management plan, so it'll be in the draft budget. So obviously, if you get to the point where Councillor Sparta's budget takes $2 million out, we'll change this. So this is not a lead on to but this doesn't dictate the budget.
Councillor Gates?
Just to be clear, so it's a new proposal that's in the budget.
My understanding is that, and Elton can correct me if I'm wrong, there's about $5 or $6 million that was in the 21-22 budget from memory, and it was about planning of future stages of the Hotter precinct, and we've cash flowed it over 2 years from memory.
Correct. That's right. So we had 5 million, we took 2 million out, and then we proposed to put 2 million back again.
Okay. So
Councillor Hamill, have you any further comments on that?
Thanks, Chair.
Any further discussion on this particular item? No further discussion. Moved by councillor Gates, seconded by councillor Young. All in favour? Against? Carried. Now it's the closed session reports and presentations. Could I have someone move that we go into closed session? Councillor Young moved, we go into closed session, seconded by councillor Taylor. All in favour? All in favour that we go into close? Against? Carried. Going to moved into open. Live streaming's on. Could I, Councillor Owen Jones, would you like to move that recommendation?
Yeah, moved.
Councillor Gates, second.
Sure.
Any discussion on the item? All in favour? Against? Carried. General business. Is there any general business? Councillor Tozer.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. I had raised some information and I'd asked for a report in relation to an application being made by the Mudgeeraba Show Society to recommence their whole of city funding agreement, multi-year whole of city funding agreement for the annual Mudgeeraba Agricultural Show. They lodged that relevant application and a report was prepared which was going to be dealt with for the next cycle of meetings. That report was provided to me as a kind of a divisional councillor and it was provided in its fullness, but I asked whether it was possible for it to be dealt with as a general business item in this cycle to give some certainty to the Mudgeeraba Show about the council's ongoing commitment to the Mudgeeraba Show as an annual event. And the author of the report, Matt Taylor, provided an excerpt of that finished report in an email which was distributed to committee members, and I've now distributed it as well to Councillor Vorster. And I'd hoped that the chair today might accept a general business item. I can't move it, but it basically is spelled out in that email.
Oh, I'm happy to do. Are you going to move that?
I'm not a member of this committee.
Oh, of course.
I don't know
You're not.
why I'm here today. Thank you for your company.
Would one of the committee like to move that general business? Would you like to?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, so there's some wording in the email. The first item is that, and this is the officer recommendation from the excerpt of the report. It's not necessarily my view, but it's the officer's recommended wording.
Yep.
That one, that council approve the community event grant application CEG 21-22157. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Pursuant to the community grants policy on the following terms, and it's a 1-year allocation. And that 2, that the Mudgeeraba Show Society be encouraged to submit an application for special funding to the competitive citywide grants program, and 3, that a future report will be presented to council as part of the 2022 citywide grants program, including the option to enter into a multi-year funding agreement with the Mudgeeraba Show Society. And if someone was willing to move that and second it, I'd welcome the opportunity to speak to it with your permission, Madam Chair.
Can I have someone move? Look, I'm happy to move that. And Councillor Taylor second.
Now I have questions.
Question, Councillor Gates.
I'm really confused about this, Councillor McDonald. I just need to understand, was the application that is referred to an application through the Division 9 Community Events Funding Opportunity?
So the answer to that question through you, Madam Chair, is that the Mudgeeraba Show Society, for a number of years, were under a whole of city program, and they were unaware that they needed to apply for funding because the regime in relation to major events changed during the COVID season. They raised it at a recent meeting with me and said, how come council's not supporting the Mudgeeraba Show? That doesn't seem aligned with your views or Mr Mayor, who's visited our site and talked to us about a long-term future. And it was explained to them that they actually needed to apply. I talked to Luke Wallace in the Office of the Mayor, talked to the community grants team, and it was recommended that I advise them to apply for a community event grant, and that the council would consider a multi-year agreement, which is what they applied for. And then as that application was reviewed, it was recommended instead that...
Sorry, the question is, was it a community event grant through your divisional budget?
That's what was recommended to me to solve the problem. Because it's a whole of city...
So it hasn't been a whole of city application as per every other group in the city that applies through that process. So this would be moving away through a general business item I just need to understand this fully, and saying basically to groups across the city, if you forgot to apply or you overlooked it or you thought you didn't have to, then just come through our local area works application process and we'll approve it for you. I don't feel comfortable with that myself. I am a big supporter of the Mudgera Bar Show and I want to be able to support them, but I think there's a lot we need to consider in terms of both of the shows. I haven't had any information at all, and I don't believe anyone else has yet, about the Gold Coast show. I saw an email from someone that suggested they're trying...
Sorry, Madam Chair. My brother has ATM's place at the Gold Coast show. So
I won't refer to the Gold Coast show again. Okay. I'll just simply say that I think that through the budget process, we will become aware of how we fund maybe one Gold Coast show, possibly two, but I would rather leave it till then. And if the time constraints are such that you need to provide some assurance, I would be suggesting that you approve the community grant application and fund it, and then we deal with it appropriately through the right process thereafter. That would be my feeling.
Councillor Tozer?
Yeah, so it became evident to the Show Society and my office that the previous arrangement was no longer suitable. They did apply under what would otherwise be a divisional event grant, and they did that because they were instructed to after I'd consulted the relevant parties. And it was also made clear to me that there was a surplus of funds in the available budget for whole of city community event allocations. There was not all the funds in that allocated budget were entirely expended, and that possibly was a product of them not having applied under that whole of city program before. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers the question, but the reality is we are acting outside of the standard process for these scale of community events. There is insufficient funds in my divisional community event grant because I didn't make provision for what was traditionally a whole of city funded activity. And we are where we are because of the advice I received from the officers involved.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, so for my reference, are we saying we as a city did whole of city fund the Mudgera Bar Show Society previously?
Yeah, we have only ever funded the Mudgera Bar Show Society for their annual Mudgera Bar Agricultural Show through whole of city funding sources. Yeah. I have provided community facility grants for specific projects, and I did that last year. There was some confusion with the Show Society Committee thinking that allocation represented council's contribution, and in the 2020 year they didn't hold a show, and so they didn't feel necessarily comfortable applying for funding in a year where they weren't holding a show. So it was all a bit dubious at the time when COVID came out in 2020.
Yeah. Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, and I suppose I just want to get an understanding of the actual breakdown. I know we've had some change in relation to major events in the city. Had that anything to do with it, or is it total separate because of COVID? And the confusion.
I mean, for the 90 years the Mudgera Bar Agricultural Show has been held, they've had a whole of city allocation from the council with the exception of these last 2 years. The council's reviewed and noted their strategic plan. They are relatively financial. They're in a relatively good nick, notwithstanding the difficulties they've had over COVID. But this item that we're dealing with here is effectively a bringing forward of something that was going to be in the next meeting cycle with a full report in order to give the Mudgera Bar Show Society certainty some 60 days out from their show, where they had perceived that the agreement that council had with them was negotiated on an individual basis rather than through a broader community grant exercise.
Just a question, Mr McKay. Do you know of any other groups that have missed out because of the changes with the city events, how it's been changed now?
It's not a major event in my understanding, Joe, so it shouldn't have been impacted in any way.
My understanding, but I'd seek to be corrected if that's not right.
It's not considered a major event. They had a 4-year multi-year deal, Madam Chair,
but there's been
that expired and then COVID hit and they didn't make a reapplication after COVID happened.
I just wanted to know, there'd be other events in this city that were normally whole of city that have missed out. Is there any other events that have previously got whole of city funding that have been missed out. Do we know of any of those events now? Councillor Gates?
I can't name any events, but I can recall discussion where we haven't been able to help groups that fail to launch within the advertised time frames. And that is my problem here. I'm happy to wait for the report, which is next round, and look at it. But this is a departure from our policy that I'm so sorry, Glenn, but I'm just uncomfortable supporting. It's budgetary, and we all know that we simply don't, as a rule, make changes to the budget at committee level,
So,
other than within the budget process. And it sets a precedent that if someone forgets to make application, we pick up the loose change. It doesn't stop the Mudgera Bar show from proceeding by us waiting for the report and making our decision then. And Councillor Tozer has suggested they've got a healthy bank account. So I think we should wait for the report. And
I'll go back to
could I just ask Councillor Tozer how much funding you provided through your divisional budget last year, through your community grant?
so the community facility grant was for a CCTV project to make the showgrounds more secure with CCTV, and add an addendum to the Digital City project to connect some of the Digital City fibre project to that, to make sure that Wi-Fi and CCTV was delivered, and it was $19,500.
So it wasn't for the show?
No.
Right.
No, I provided a community facility grant, and to be frank, I've got a volunteer committee at the Mudgera Bar Show Society who, for the last decades, have always kind of had a hands-on, kind of personalised. And you're absolutely right. They weren't sufficiently made aware of their obligation to apply under the whole of city grants program. They weren't advised of that. And whilst I will take responsibility for that, I asked for advice how to rectify that. And the advice that was provided to me was make application under this program, and let's let the council consider whether they either support a sponsorship of the Mudgera Bar Show or not. And this is the mechanism that was recommended to me. The only reason we're dealing with it today as a general business item is because I asked, given that we're only 60 days out from the show, to provide that certainty, because I believed that councillors would view it favourably and provide that certainty. I do have a question. What isn't in the report is that it was relayed to me that there was actually a surplus amount of money in the relevant budget from which we would draw these funds. And I'd hate to think that councillors believe that we were adding to the budget when my understanding is there was available funds in the available budget allocated. Yeah. So could I get some clarity around that?
Yes. Thanks, Matt.
Through you, Chair. So with the policy revision in October last year, there was intended to be a 1st of January round to receive applications. In the policy revision, that was knocked back down to one round per year. So the funds that were set aside, around $150,000 that were intended for that round, are no longer being used because that round didn't proceed. So that would have been the round that the Mudgera Bar Show Society would have applied to on the 1st of January, but that round did not proceed.
Okay. And council resolved for it not to proceed?
Correct.
Right. So to me, there was an error there, and that's okay. There was council's decision to do that, but I wasn't adequately prepared, and so we need, in order for us to provide that support, I'd hoped that councillors would show their support in this way, with the $150,000 surplus being the allocated funding from which these funds would be drawn, which would, after allocation, would result in a $120,000 surplus available for other purposes that we might choose to use it for.
Councillor Gates?
Just one more question for Councillor Tozer. When you suggest they've got a healthy bank account, do you know how much they have in reserve?
So the show normally costs about $200,000 to run each year, and my understanding is they have approximately $160,000 in surplus funds, and they haven't drawn on all of the sponsors' allocations this year yet. Not everyone pays 60 days out. So that they have, frankly, they have enough to run the show if we don't allocate this funding, but I think it would be very, very helpful for them to run a successful show. They are running a very sustainable business, and after they run the show, they'll hopefully have another in the vicinity of $200,000 remaining if it's hopefully a successful show, which is the last 4 years have shown that they're quite financially sustainable, but that extra funding really does help them as they approach the show days.
Sorry, so I'm still interested in the fact that despite that $160,000 healthy, sustainable account, we're looking at increasing our funding through this general business item without the benefit of the report. So I still feel that I would rather see the report and have that justified, why you think that's, you know, rather than our contributions to all of the events in the city being seed funding, and with the hope that these events are self-sustainable, I don't understand why we're increasing it when they're doing a great job and it's a great show. I don't have a problem at all. I'd like to see it as our number one show in the city, to be perfectly honest, but I'd rather wait for the report and allocate the funds, because there's not going to be any difference to the Mudgeeraba show other than a show of earlier support rather than later support with the full knowledge before us.
Councillor Tozer.
My question through you, Madam Chair, to Mr Taylor, if that's all right, would it be appropriate for us to provide the report to Councillor Gates? I mean, the report you showed me, is that something we could do or not? I mean, the excerpt of the report is in the email that I have distributed to all committee members, but is it okay if we...
Look, I haven't seen the report, so this is the first I've sort of been hearing of this, so we don't distribute draft reports, so my view it shouldn't be the case. I mean, obviously you've got an excerpt from that report, but I think that's where it should sit to the time being.
Okay, Councillor Young.
And through you, Madam Chair, to to Joe, with what Councillor Tozer's put up there, and like we're all supportive of the show out there, go quite regularly, but just tell me, where would we be opening ourselves up with if we were to support something like this today, with the competitive nature of how we're legislated to do it now? What could we potentially be opening ourselves up for if we were to support this today? And Glenn, you know, I'm very supportive of your show. I just want to know that, you know, where we sit.
I'll have to go back to the policy, but so obviously it's not in accordance with the way we normally do things. I think, Matt, from memory, the policy provides council with an avenue to approve one-off grants, from memory. So I'm not sure there's an issue there in terms of, you know, leaving council exposed. I think it's really a case of, you know, not sort of following the normal process in terms of policies. On the basis that I think Matt's confirmed that we can do one-off.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, so we have had a history of doing it along these lines in the past. So we've funded Easter United in the same fashion on a multiple year funding agreement last year on through a community event grant application. At the conclusion of the community or the citywide grants program in August last year, we also provided the balance of funding to surf lifesaving clubs without an application. So there is a history of going down this path. It's allowed under the policy as it's an eligible application that's been received. The question today is really where the funding's coming from.
Any further questions or comments? Yeah.
Chair, if I could just ask through you to Matt, do you know what the level of funding was last year? Or what was the last amount that we've paid them?
I do have that in front of you through the Chair. The previous multiple year funding agreement that we were entered into was for $25,000 per annum. Historically, that's gone back to the 2019-20 year, and prior to that, we had 40-odd multiple year funding agreements expire in that financial year, and we've re-entered into 23. So there's a balance of about 17 multiple year funding agreements that were discontinued and not re-entered into at that point, this being one of them.
And so, again, through the Chair to Matt, in terms of 3 in this proposed recommendation, I accept the fact that it very much was in draft, so it's not endorsed by the organisation as it normally would be, but would this then align the Mudgeeraba show with the other multiple year funding agreements, or would it still need another year to align with other multiple funding year agreements?
So through the chair, with the revision of the policy in October last year, there was a specific category created for large whole of city type events up to $150,000 per annum. And as part of that special category that was created in the policy revision, it allowed for the city to consider those applications on a multiple year funding agreement through until the end of the council term. So that would capture community organisation applications like the ones from the Sporting Hall of Fame, Gold Coast Show, the Eisteddfod, those large-scale events that do draw on the majority share of the community grants budget. That's where number 3 recommendation comes from, because that program hasn't opened or closed before the first time that program we run on the 1st of July.
Any further questions? Councillor Owen Jones.
So personally, I'd prefer it to be 25,000. I'm happy to support it, and I appreciate Councillor Gates's views. I think that it should pick up where the last agreement left off, and I think that by doing that, we in part acknowledge the fact that there's been at least 2 difficult years by COVID, and it also, in my mind, aligns the support the city's provided the other show, which I don't think has the benefit of a healthy, sustainable balance sheet at the moment. So I think that we should pivot and adapt and contribute towards the successful 2022 agricultural show.
Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I personally would like to support this one off. Look, it has been a city funded event previously, so it's not as if this is the first time. We've got a report coming, so obviously down the track we can understand what the report says, and obviously considering future events. We want to ensure that the good events that we have in our city, and this one is one of our good events and original agriculture events, that they stay strong and profitable, and it's my opinion, based on those, that we should be able to support something like this. And we have shown that we have supported these type of events before as a one-off, so I would be supportive of the resolution and, yes, the modification to keep it in line. I'm happy to support that also.
No further discussion, councillors.
So Councillor McDonald, at the moment there's a live motion
That's
at
right.
25, so at 30.
At 30, yep.
Where are we going to land there?
Well, are you going to change it?
Well, so
I can do it as an amendment, but both you've moved it, Councillor.
Well, I'm prepared to go as the resolution that's been put up.
May I speak to that briefly? From 2019, for the 10 years prior, the amount was $25,000, and to be frank, they did apply for a multi-year agreement, and that it's changed such that we have a 1-year agreement instead of the 3-year agreement that they applied for. And I actually recommended to them that they increase their request because of the costs of running the show have increased. And I don't, I appreciate the council's resolution on this. If they resolve at $25,000, it's fine. But that was the decade prior to 2019. It was $25,000 every year. And the reality is we do want our shows to be sustainable. And I think it's appropriate and reasonable for us to have regard for increasing costs of an event of the scale of the Mudgeeraba Agricultural Show. And I would like to think that we would acknowledge those changes with an increased funding allocation.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Young and then Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Councillor McDonald. And I tend to, on this part of things, as a one-off, support what Councillor Tozer has put forward there with the 30,000. We've all of our budget discussions this whole year have been about 30, 40, 50, 60% increases in costs on everything throughout the city. We've got a group here that's been very sustainable, that's put on a show every year, that's been greatly attended by our community, and again have $160,000 worth of funding in their coffers ready to proceed. So they've worked diligently during the down period of the 2 years of COVID, and I actually think for $5,000, I think if it gives them the comfort or the leeway to actually produce the show as we're used to seeing it, then I'd be comfortable supporting the $30,000 as a one-off for 21-22.
Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm happy to support the extra $5,000 it is 3 years ago. So yeah, I'm happy to support the current motion.
Okay. Councillor Owen Jones, did you want to do an amendment?
It's not a lot of point, so we are where we are.
Okay. Councillor Gates? Okay. I'll put the resolution, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favour? 5. 4. 1 against. Resolution carried. Any further general business?
Not a GB, Madam Chair, but on the very last item, it's not a question, but just raise something for Joe to have a look at after the meeting. Just the report right at the back is meant to list 115 properties, and there's a duplication of 14 properties in there, so that it's not accurate. Right.
Yeah, some of mine are not in there.
The first 14 on the first page are repeated on the 4th page. So obviously might need to check how that's been put together.
Yeah. And 13.
Yeah, so that's probably where it is, because it looks like a
whole list needs to be looked at.
That's only that. So I wasn't sure if we needed to open that item back up and not adopt it in the committee since it's not accurate.
Can I suggest that I'll do the homework this afternoon and sort it out for council tomorrow?
Yep.
Okay.
So we don't have to do anything?
No, I wouldn't worry about it now, yeah.
Yep.
Any further general business? Thanks for the attendance, Councillor Tozer and Councillor Forster. Meeting finished at 11:20.